Welcome to a Stationeers coding video on injecting CO2 safely into a room, typically a hydroponic environment growing plants. And here we have a test setup where we have a filtration device with two CO2 filters. The filtered gas is injected into the room through this vent. The gas we don't want to use is sent outside. And in this case, we are bringing in gas from a furnace, which we previously burned to heat the room up, which has CO2 in it. So it effectively pull the CO2 and other gases out of the furnace through filtration. The CO2 we inject into the room, and the other gases will just dump outside in this case. Also have the flashing light. If for any reason the CO2 level in the room drops below a certain threshold, the alarm will go off. So for example, if the filters go empty or you run out of CO2 from the source, wherever that may be, it'll catch the fact that the CO2 is dropping in the room and some attention is required to address that. So let's take a look at the code. The code will be linked in the description and with a reference to GitHub, which I can update over time. Now, there are various ways to inject CO2 into a room. This particular way uses a filtration device. And effectively, we're going to inject CO2 into a room using a bunch of settings. The flashing light is optional. If you do not have it and it's not configured to D0, nothing happens except, well, you don't get a flashing light. And this current configuration is set up for potatoes, except I was just testing this, so we'll put this back the way it was in the original coding. And something like that. All right. Not really happy with this editor. All right. Well, the actual code checked in will have the correct, we'll say 50 with 50 kilopascals. All right. So here we have a bunch of user defines at the beginning. This is the minimal carbon dioxide alarm. If the ratio goes below 2%, the flashing alarm will go off if it's set up. The goal is to keep here's a minimum maximum. So it attempts to keep the carbon dioxide between these two values. And that means it either keeps between two values, which means if the threshold is 5%, it will not inject until it hits 6%. So effectively, if it's below 4%, it injects. If it's above 6%, it does not inject. And so if it's sitting at, you said 5%, and it's not injecting, it won't bother. Then we have, and that's obviously we don't want to push the CO2 too high, and if it's obviously too low, we want to add CO2. Typically in a hydroponic environment, we want to maintain a pressure threshold. This is set up for potatoes. It preferred between 50 to 100 kilopascals. And what the injection system will do is if the pressure is too high, it'll stop injecting. If it's too low, it will actually keep injecting, overriding this maximum to try to get the pressure up by filling it with CO2. This is our device port. It's on D0, and it says it's listed as optional. If it's not there, we'll skip over it. These are various state variables I set up. So this pattern sets up state, and then after the various state is computed, then it makes the rule checks of what to do based on the state. So if the carbon dioxide alarm should go off, if carbon dioxide is too high, too low, pressure is too high, too low. In this case, initialization, we disable injections just to make sure the filtration is turned off. Do our typical yield. And here we are computing state. So these state variables right here are computed in this point. So I load the pressure output from the filtration unit. And based on that pressure, I'll make two comparisons to the minimum and the maximum, setting the state variables. I'll then load the carbon dioxide ratio from the output. And based on the various threshold, it computes the values. Basically, the set creates a Boolean value of 1 or 0, basically true or false. Then once we compute all the state, now we can apply the rules. And the nice thing about this, we separate the action from computing the state. And so I think this makes things a lot bit simpler. It also, once you have the state computed, you can play around with the rules a little bit, what I'll have to then try to move the actual computation logic around with it. Now, this is obviously a little more verbose, but when you get really complicated stuff and it does some really weird things, breaking it all out, making it real simple or straightforward is definitely useful. So in the set alert, this, if there's no device set to D-alarm, which is D0, it just jumps over this. If it does exist, then it will set the on to whatever that rule is. So if the alarm shouldn't be set, be 0, turns it off. If it's 1, it turns it on. And then we apply the rule. Now you can move these rules around if you don't like the priority. Basically, this is the first priority, second priority, third priority, fourth priority. And the priority here is the pressure too high? And it turns it off. Now you could argue, well, but if the CO2 is too low, that's probably a higher priority. Now, in a hydroponic room, you typically have two systems running: one adding CO2 and one retrieving, extracting O2 from the room. And they work in parallel. So the system that pulls CO2 should prevent this condition from happening the system pulling out O2 should prevent this from happening because it's extracting the O2, keeping the pressure within bounds. And then this system will notice the plant's consuming the CO2 and inject more CO2. If for some reason it's too high, obviously, apparently something's not running on the extraction of O2. And thus, in this case, the rule set in this particular scenario is just to turn off. We don't want to blow up the room. That would be very bad. Also could argue that the alarm should go off at this point too. And then in that case, I could add another logic up here for alarm that, if this is true, once we have this value, we can do an OR it with the too high value. So I could have ORed it right here, and that way the alarm would have gone off either if it's too high or carbon dioxide is too low. And you see how by breaking this up, I'm making a hand movement now, which you can't see. But by breaking this up into these sections, it makes changing around the rules easier than, as I said, having it all, together. But in this case, the way it's set up here is if it's too high, it's going to turn injection off. Now, let's say the pressure stays too high and the CO2 keeps dropping until it's too low, the alarm would go off in this scenario. So it would, even if the pressure, nothing was pulling the gas out, it was still detected. If it's too low, in this case, just inject. Get the pressure back up. If the CO2 goes a bit high, the only danger really is if you use this habitat for breathing with your helmet off, you could push it to the point where there's not enough O2 in the room. Once again, there should be other processes managing the O2 levels in a room. And when you get this sophisticated of hydroponic rooms, I recommend just having them CO2 only and not use them for open helmet environments. But for early game, this is fine. In this case, the carbon dioxide is too high. We turn off the injection. Too low, turn it on. Default, leave it as it is. And then in this case, we repeat the loop, and then here these actions we do based on the rules. We have turn off the injection, which effectively turn off filtration, or turn on filtration. And it goes back to the main loop and repeats. So that's the setup. Now, I said you could disagree with the prioritization and change things around. The goal is sort of to describe a coding pattern, and hopefully it's easy to read and understand what it's doing, and even better if it makes it easy to go back and make changes for your own custom scenario. All right, well, that's this piece of code. I will be using this code in my Europa run in episode 16 because I need to inject CO2 from my furnace sitting in my new base hydroponic room into the environment. And I don't want to sit there, turn the switch on, waiting, turn the switch off. I'm just going to drop the chip in there and let it deal with the work so I can go off and do other things. So I did do some basic testing in it, so it does seem to work just fine. And typically all these scripts I will be using in my playthroughs. So if something happened, they're wrong, whatever, I'll fix it, check in a fix, and you can pick that up when it refreshes. All right, until next time, see ya.